You're watching South Asia Newsline, and here the top stories we are tracking for you on Thursday, the 27th of March. PM Modi urges stronger ties with Bangladesh amid rising tensions over minority violence. India-China issues expected but can be addressed without conflict, says Indian Foreign Minister. And UN experts urge Pakistan to release detained Baloch activists and end crackdown against protesters. And now for all the details. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in a letter to Chief of Interim Government of Bangladesh, emphasized shared history and urged stronger bilateral ties amid rising tensions over violence against Hindu minorities in Bangladesh. His message on National Day also highlighted historical ties, while global experts at the UNHRC event warned of increasing human rights violations under interim government led by Yunus.
Amid strained relations, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in a letter to Bangladesh's interim chief, Mohammad Yunus, emphasized the shared history between Delhi and Dhaka, urging him to strengthen bilateral relations based on mutual sensitivity to each other's interests and concerns. Modi's outreach comes as tensions have arisen following violence against Hindu minorities in Bangladesh under the interim government led by Yunus after the ouster of former PM Sheikh Hasina. India has repeatedly condemned the attacks on Hindu minorities and urged Bangladesh to ensure the safety of its religious communities and institutions. In a message to Yunus and the people of Bangladesh on the occasion of their National Day on March 26, Modi highlighted the historical ties between the two nations, referencing the Bangladesh Liberation War. Meanwhile, global experts at an event on the sidelines of the UNHRC session also raised concern over the rising human rights violations in Bangladesh. The primary aim of the event was to draw international attention to the deterioration of law and order, the persecution of minorities, and the surge of Islamic extremism in Bangladesh, led by the interim rule of Nobel laureate Dr. Mohammad Yunus.
Moving on. India and China will have issues in the foreseeable future, but there are ways to address them without getting into a conflict, Indian Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar said on Wednesday. Talking to Kyun Hwa Kang of Asia Society, Jaishankar said that India and China are trying to undo some of the damage that happened due to the actions in 2020 and rebuild bilateral ties. He said since October last year, the relationship has seen some improvement, a reference to the agreement regarding patrolling along their Himalayan border. The agreement thawed a standoff that began in 2020 when Indian and Chinese soldiers were killed in clashes. The dispute impacted several aspects of bilateral ties, from trade and technology to air travel. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi had also said last week that trust, enthusiasm and energy would return to the equation with China, and that the focus of the countries was to ensure differences do not turn into disputes. India and China share a 2,400-mile border that has been disputed since the 1950s and have previously gone to war over it. PM Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping met on the sidelines of the BRICS summit in Russia last year, their first formal talk since 2020, and agreed to boost communication and cooperation and resolve conflicts to improve ties. In a strong statement, United Nations human rights experts have called on Pakistan to release detained Baloch human rights defenders and end its crackdown on peaceful protest. The experts expressed serious concern over what they described as Pakistan's heavy-handed response to recent demonstrations. A report.
A group of independent United Nations human rights experts has called on Pakistan to immediately release detained Baloch human rights defenders and end its crackdown on peaceful protests. In a statement released on Wednesday, the UN experts expressed concern over the action by Pakistani authorities on Baloch human rights defenders, particularly Pakistan's counter-terrorism department's alleged detention of several prominent members of the Baloch Yakjehti Committee, a group advocating for Baloch minority rights. Once again, we see the use of excessive force as a first response to peaceful protests, the UN experts said in the statement. While acknowledging the trauma caused by the March 11 attack, they condemned Pakistan's heavy-handed response. describing it as arbitrary detention, enforced disappearances, and violent crackdowns that could worsen unrest rather than ease tensions. The UN experts voiced strong concern for the welfare of the detained activists and urged Pakistani authorities to provide immediate clarity on the fate and whereabouts of those allegedly subjected to enforced disappearances. We urge Pakistani authorities to immediately release the detained defenders and to refrain from misusing counterterrorism or public safety measures against peaceful activists, the experts emphasized. In a subsequent demonstration on March 22, BYC activists, including prominent human rights defender Maharang Baloch, staged a sit-in protest with the bodies of those killed in the Quetta police operation. Police later raided the sit-in using batons and tear gas to disperse the crowd. Several BYC activists, including Maharang Baloch, were arrested. Reports indicate that Maharang was held for nearly 12 hours without access to family visits or legal counsel. On March 24, Karachi police detained another BYC leader, Sammi Deen Baloch, as she protested outside the Karachi Press Club. Authorities reportedly ordered her detention for 30 days under the Sindh Maintenance of Public Order Ordinance.
The World Food Programme has warned that Afghanistan's child malnutrition program may cease without immediate funding, impacting millions of vulnerable children. The World Food Programme has warned that without urgent funding, its child malnutrition prevention programs in Afghanistan, Yemen and Syria may be suspended within months. The organization needs $1.4 million to carry out its operation in 56 countries in 2025. The UN-affiliated agency issued this warning, stressing that a lack of funds could halt its global efforts to combat child malnutrition in 3 countries. The World Food Programme has been facing severe financial challenges, particularly following the suspension of US assistance. Last year, the US provided $4.5 billion of the organization's $9.8 billion budget, a crucial part of its funding. The growing threat of malnutrition in countries like Afghanistan is a direct result of ongoing conflicts and climate change. The WFP's continued work is vital to combat this crisis, but without adequate financial support, its ability to help millions of vulnerable people is at risk. The international community must step up and ensure the necessary funding to prevent further suffering. Moving on. Former Sri Lankan Navy Commander Admiral Vasanta Karnagoda has condemned the UK's sanctions on Sri Lankan officials, including him and 2 other former military leaders, calling the action hypocritical. In an interview with the Daily Mirror, he accused Britain of ignoring its own colonial-era atrocities in Sri Lanka and India while imposing human rights sanctions on Sri Lankan military personnel over the civil war with the LTTE that ended in 2009. He questioned why the UK remains silent on global conflicts like Gaza, Syria and Afghanistan but targets Sri Lanka. He also alleged that LTTE sympathizers in Western nations are lobbying politicians to pressure Sri Lankan's military leaders. He urged that Sri Lankan government to take a strong stand against external influence. A UN panel in 2011 found credible allegations of serious violations by both sides, some of which would amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. And Nepal's ruling alliance party CPN-UML has strongly condemned recent media reports claiming that Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli accused India of conspiring to remove him from office. The party's Department of Foreign Affairs released a statement calling the allegations baseless, misleading and fabricated. The controversy stemmed from reports suggesting that during a secretariat meeting on March 17, Prime Minister Oli had not only blamed India for attempting to destabilize his government, but also advocated for the arrest of former King Gyanendra Shah. The party dismissed these reports as fictitious, deceptive and maliciously designed to mislead the public and tarnish Nepal's leadership. It further said the dissemination of such misinformation is a deliberate attempt to disrupt Nepal's internal harmony, sow discord in the region and create unnecessary strain in Nepal's diplomatic relations, particularly with India, Kathmandu's closest and most valued neighbors. It emphasized that Nepal's diplomatic ties with India remain strong and stable adding that any attempt to undermine these efforts through fabricated narratives is detrimental to Nepal's progress and regional stability. And tourists in India's Jammu and Kashmir were enthralled as Asia's largest tulip garden, Indira Gandhi Memorial Tulip Garden, opened its door on Wednesday. Tulips in full bloom, boasting bright colors, have become a major tourist attraction as around 500,000 tourists thronged the serene gardens in Srinagar city last year. The garden, spread over an area of 30 hectares, is nestled on the foothills of Zabrawan mountain range with a view of the iconic Dal Lake. Its opening also marks the beginning of a new tourism season in the Kashmir Valley.
1.7 million, 17 lakh tulips will be on display. And other than tulips, spring blooming, all other spring blooming bulbous plants will also be in display.
कश्मीर स्पेशली आया था कि टुलिप सुना था, नाम भी कमल था, कभी कमल के फूल देखूंगा, पर कश्मीर जब भी देखा था बमबारी ये और वही देखता था, आज आया तो एकदम चमन सा लग रहा है.
That's all in tonight's edition. We will see you same time tomorrow. Good night.